Can you just share for our viewers a little bit of your background and what brought you to this issue?
Okay. Well, first of all, I was born and raised in wonderful Baltimore, Maryland, home of The Wire, HBO series. But I was raised in Baltimore, where we've had a drug problem for quite some time. And when I say drug problem, I mean illegal market. This country's always had a drug problem. But in the late 1970s, I went into the Maryland State Police, and I spent most of my career in the Maryland State Police, either in narcotics or criminal investigation, enforcement. Either arrested or responsible for arresting thousands of people, commanding numerous drug task forces in the western part of the state, then in the eastern part of the state. Yeah, we put a lot of people in jail, and mostly for nonviolent drug offenses. Ending my career in 1999, I was the commander of the Education and Training Division for the Maryland State Police. When I left there, I went and was recruited by Baltimore to run their training and education department for the Baltimore Police Department. So now we were teaching police officers on how to go out in the streets and enforce the laws and make the arrest in line with the laws that we have on the books. And from there, I went to the Maryland Transit Administration Police Department and commanded their detective bureau for them. And that involved in addition to narcotics, and other crimes, it also involved homeland security issues. So in a nutshell, that was my law enforcement background, 33 years of law enforcement. But in the mid-90s is when I first started taking a different look at the war on drugs, Prohibition. It was Mayor Kurt Schmoke. I had the pleasure to serve on his board for needle exchange. And see, Mayor Schmoke was about harm reduction even in the 1990s. He was about ridding his city of, how can I say it, the violence associated with the illegal drug trade. He recognized this. He recognized that we had high cases of AIDS and hepatitis. So I got the pleasure to serve on that board. I got to hear from him, and I got to hear from him when he said, the war on drugs is not working, we need to rethink it, we need to start having a conversation about a different direction. And of course, many criticized him for taking that approach. But it wasn't until 2000, after I left the Maryland State Police, when a very close friend of mine, who was also a narcotics agent for the Maryland State Police, was assassinated just a couple miles from here in Washington, D.C., making his final undercover drug buy from this mid-level drug dealer. Drug dealer decided he wanted to keep the drugs he was selling as well as the money that Ed Totley had to buy the drugs, and he shot him at point-blank range. Ed Totley left behind a wonderful wife and 3 kids, needlessly. Wow. It wasn't but a couple years after that when I stumbled across an organization called LEAP, which had just formed. I found them on the internet. They were very small at that time, back in 2002. Law Enforcement Against Prohibition was the brainchild of Peter Christ, and it was put together and managed by Jack Cole, who is a retired New Jersey State Police lieutenant, who spent most of his time enforcing narcotics laws. And they just had the, how can I say this, the vision, to put together this organization of law enforcement professionals, not just cops, but judges and prosecutors and corrections officials. So they had that vision, they put it together, and today we are about 30,000 supporters in 78 countries, a speakers bureau of about 100 of these current and former law enforcement professionals. And we're speaking about harm reduction. But I mentioned Ed Totley, who was assassinated back in 2000, making an undercover drug buy. I then started looking around, and I found that there were literally tens and hundreds of police officers that have died enforcing drug prohibition laws over the past few decades, for the past 40 years. Something else I also noticed, that when we in law enforcement took down major drug operations and opened the floodgates for thousands of violent entrepreneurs, they brought the violence to the streets. And with that, many innocent people were caught in the crossfire. One family in particular, just 2 years after Ed Totley was assassinated, the Dawson family in Baltimore City, their home was firebombed by the neighborhood drug dealer. Why was that? It's because Angela, who was the mom, and then there was the dad and 5 kids, but Angela, who was the mom, was working with police on ridding her neighborhood of this drug dealer and his organization. She was interfering with his market share, his money. So he decided one night while they slept to firebomb their home. And all 7, each and every one, perished in that fire. This isn't just unique to Baltimore. It's unique to hundreds of cities across this country.